Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Megan DeMena and Jacob Warwick, who are presenting Be the David in Your Own Content Marketing Story. Megan is the community manager and leader of communication efforts at ClearVoice. She oversees all social content, the ClearVoice digital community, webinars, podcasts, and all strategic planning for content distribution. Jacob is the founder of Think Warwick, a performance marketing-driven consultancy that provides brand and marketing strategy to help businesses get the most from their tactical marketing operations. Jacob has spent the last 11 years working both brand and agency side for organizations like Xerox, Under Armour, and LinkedIn, and he's helped dozens of executives and entrepreneurs position exceptional brands and execute content marketing strategies. At the end of our presentation, we'll ask Jacob and Megan your questions, so feel free to post them here during the presentation in the Q&A chat, and we will get to as many as we can. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it over. Please, Jacob and Megan, take it away.
Thank you for the very warm introduction. It makes us sound pretty good, actually, so we appreciate that. Today, Megan and I want to talk to you not just about some content strategies that we use or the tactics, but quite a bit about the soft skills that every content marketer is going to need to find success in their strategies and just in their day-to-day work. We're going to use a Q&A format where I'll be asking Megan questions. Megan will ask myself questions and give you guys a chance to ask questions after the presentation. A little bit of background on us. We've probably been working together for about 3 years now, and we've overcome anything from getting a blog post out on time to getting a third-party publication and press releases done to webinars and any kind of video content and things like that. So we've kind of been around the block through email, and yeah, I guess the marketing list goes on and on, so I'm sure you guys understand that. But that brings me to a point that there's one core problem that us as content marketers often face, and that's that depending on who you ask, content marketing can mean something completely different. So if you ask 10 people, you'll get 10 different answers. And I like to think of this as juggling plates, right? Are you a copywriter? Are you a video producer? Are you any of these, XYZ things that you need to be a successful content marketer? And essentially, your job as a content marketer is to ultimately just grow the business. So all of those tactical things kind of just end up as plates that you need to be considerate of, but don't necessarily need to embody your day-to-day. And so having that, a lot of our superiors will ask us to do things like, hey, why aren't we doing video marketing, and why aren't we doing more blog posts or things like that? And it's very difficult to juggle all these tasks, and you may feel overwhelmed. But something that Megan's been helping me a lot with is figuring out how to feel less overwhelmed, so to speak. So Megan, why don't you share a little bit about how you feel less overwhelmed when maybe you feel overburdened with tasks?
Oh, yeah, sure. I think that happens to everybody. But first, I want to say thank you to Heidi for the great setup, and Jacob, too. Just to be clear, Jacob and I did meet at ClearVoice, but I'm now the senior marketing manager over at AppBuddy. So there I'm kind of overseeing lead generation, conferences, events, and distribution still across multiple channels. So, yeah, back to the question.
Good clarification.
It's a new transition, so that's on us for not updating that. But so how do I handle being overwhelmed with tasks? This happens to everybody, anywhere. I think it really just starts with putting the right systems in place, understanding your end goals, and specifically with content, slowing down and listening to your audience. So, you kind of mentioned this earlier, Jacob, content marketing means a lot to a lot of different people. But what does it mean to you, Jacob?
I've struggled with this answer over the past couple of years, and it comes up in conversation here and there, and sometimes you'll get the debate between what is content marketing, what is content strategy. But to me, it really means, at least in an everyday work role that I think is a good takeaway for people, it really means being adaptable. And not being adaptable to what your bosses need, but being adaptable to what your audience needs and what your customers are most going to resonate with. So if you come into a content marketing role as a great copywriter, that may be your awesome strength, but you may need to pick up some other adaptable tasks and skill sets to be able to find the formats and the type of content you need to produce to find the most success in your role. So I think it's important to note that you don't necessarily need to be everything to everyone. It's actually impossible to be the best CSS specialist and the best growth hacker and a copywriter and a designer and all of these things that you need to often find success. You don't need to be all of those things, but you do need to come up with a strategy that really fits your personal suite of skills and the resources that you have available to you, whether you're a small team, a one-man or one-woman operation, or even at an enterprise level. You need to kind of come up with that strategy first. And that really leads me into talking about a method that we have that should be a good takeaway for everyone. It's a 3-step method that we developed, and it starts with strategy first. And that's really understanding both your audience as well as yourself, your team, your resources, and what they need, and putting a game plan in place. So we're going to spend 3 or 4 slides on strategy, and then we'll move into part 2 of this 3-step method, which is applying that strategy. Again, if you have a great strategy and you're not doing anything with it, well, you're not going to see any results. So step 2 is equally as important because you need to be acting on that strategy. So again, we'll spend another 3 or 4 slides on applying that strategy. And finally, and the third step is really a learning opportunity for everyone, and that's measurement. And that's measuring your success, communicating that success with your bosses, as well as understanding what you need to optimize to move forward. And going through this process, and Megan and I have recently been working on a new strategy because it is the first step in our game plan. We overcame some challenges while building it. And I'd like Megan to elaborate on some of the challenges that we ran into, because I might tend to ramble on this, and I think she's pretty clear on it. So Megan, can you share some of the challenges we ran into with the audience in a cheerful demeanor?
Yeah. They're pretty straightforward, right? So before you can fix anything, you have to understand these challenges. So we identified that there were large segments of our database that weren't being marketed to. We had landing pages with a 94% bounce rate, and we weren't regularly listening to our audience and customer feedback. So, we were able to quickly see these gaps, and we reached out and surveyed our customers. We talked to our internal stakeholders, and we targeted our audience and talked and spoke to some of our target audience and to get the full picture of the story we were trying to tell, what we were trying to say. And I do want to kind of circle back to one point, too, that Jacob made just a moment ago about trying to be all things to everything or to everyone. Video right now is a good example of that. Like everybody says, video. Well, really, like, what do you want to accomplish with that video? You don't want to just start making these things and working on these strategies if your foundation is broken. So first identify what's not working, and in this plan you should include like the story that you want to communicate. So figure out where you want to take action, fix the problems while you're still producing, because you don't want marketing to stall at the same time. So don't slow down marketing, but fix those foundational issues before you start running off to the newest, greatest, trying to be everything to everyone. So, we found what wasn't working, and we did find what was working. And Jacob, I'd love for you to chat about the channels we found that were working and how we used them.
Well, you make it sound a lot easier said than done. So I'm going to emphasize with everyone on the call here. Yeah, fix everything in marketing while producing marketing and getting results all at the same time. No big deal, right? Well, it kind of is challenging. I mean, one, just knowing how to grow the business is one part. And two, fixing all the things you need to do it's on skill set in its own right. So we kind of had to rethink the way we went into marketing. A lot of times, Megan and I will come in and work with companies that have a lot of stuff set up just fine, and we can start providing immediate results. And other times, there are challenges where the systems don't make sense. The leads aren't tracking. The bounce rates are really high. The just XYZ problem could be happening. So what we ended up doing is we noticed the purpose, and this is something you were bringing on earlier when you said, like, why do video, why do this? It's really coming up with a purpose for your efforts. So everything that you're doing is tracking to solve a challenge. So we noticed, okay, the bounce rates are really high. Let's nuke those and fix the website. Now, if the marketing department spends all of its time fixing the website, we're not growing pipeline, which is what our bosses really care about. Sure, they like the website, but to them, another pretty website is another pretty website. If it's not leading to sales or helping push marketing initiatives, it's really not that important to them. So we had to communicate the importance of a better optimized website. But while we were doing so, we noticed that we had a fairly engaged email list. In this circumstance that we're referring to, we had about 100,000 people on an email list that had been nurtured by the organization for about 8 years. So we said, wow, well, there's something that we can experiment with while we optimize the website without getting too far bogged down. And that way we can start seeing some early wins while we fix some of the other challenges. Additionally, and you brought this up, Megan, we worked with the customer success team to interview and learn more about our current customers and really try to integrate their feedback into the website, into the emails that we were sending, and really just learn more about them because it's always changing and we need to schedule. I mean, we should honestly be talking to our customers even more often, Megan, but it's only so much you can do. But we did want to work on that simultaneously. And so what we saw immediately, and this is going to sound absolutely ridiculous, but keep in mind, we saw a 1,600% increase in traffic just from sending emails. Now, again, take that with a grain of salt because previously there weren't a lot of emails being sent out, so as soon as you engage that list, people are going to come over. But it really indicated that, okay, we're on the right track, but we need to be a bit more consistent with our marketing efforts so that we can see this kind of more sustainable traffic over time. And so basically, you hit 1,600% and you tell your bosses, hey guys or gals, we got 1,600% traffic increase. We're really excited. And they go, great, do it again. They don't ask how. They just say, do it again, more and more. Send emails all the time. Get that increase all the time. And you're saying, okay, if we send an email very often, we're going to bog the list down. We're not going to see those results. They're not sustainable. So I'm sure this has happened to several marketers on the line right now. You really start to get unrealistic expectations once you start finding a little bit of success. And this, again, is something that Megan's really been helping me with. Megan, how do you handle unrealistic expectations? Because I think every marketer on the line has been in a situation like that.
Yeah, I mean, me too. So you kind of said it in a roundabout way, but don't just take a win and think you've fixed your problems. If you're looking at your analytics and you're just seeing all these nice, like, up, down, up, down, up, down, that's not what you want. And it's not sustainable. I mean, yeah, 1,600%, that's fantastic, but to do it again over and over again, you're going to have email burnout. It's not sustainable. It's not going to work. So what you want to see is that slow and steady growth of the graph just working itself up, 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 and that's going to take time. It's going to take consistency, and it's going to take strategy. And so, setting those expectations is being honest with yourself so that you can communicate those expectations to your supervisors or superiors and your stakeholders. And steering clear of confirmation bias. If someone is saying, oh, I know we can do this, I know we can do this, but, you're finding through the numbers and through listening to your audience that isn't exactly the true story, that's not the full picture. Just having confidence and being honest with everybody in the room and having those really hard conversations that no one likes to have about why you can't get that done, why you're not going to see 1,600% month over month. So, and it's kind of an example, like if you're looking at a database that is unengaged and is messy and all these things. You can't just keep sending emails and expecting them to land and to work. You're going to have to back up. You're going to have to clean it up. You're going to have to spend some time on some opt-in campaigns, some opt-out campaigns, and really just, again, go back to the fundamentals and get your foundation where it needs to be. And Jacob, you're really good at this, setting pragmatic goals. So why don't you talk to us about how you set those pragmatic goals?
I like that you say that I'm really good at it, because it's actually a challenge every time, and it's a challenge for entry-level marketers, mid-level marketers, senior marketers, saying no sometimes, or no, not yet, or giving reasons why you can't do something or why you need to manage expectations accordingly. Sounds in theory like it would be so easy, but ultimately as marketers we want to perform, and we want to say yes, and we want to make our brands as big as they can be and really help our customers out. But it's just not realistic in a lot of circumstances where you have limited resources, or you have a small team, or there's budget constraints. There's so many issues that can stop you from seeing the growth and the success that obviously your superiors are pushing you to get. So what we noticed is that, okay, this spike is great, but we still needed to address the website optimization problems, the database challenges, and if we tried to do a daily email or did all these things a little bit more frequent as the superiors wanted, we'd overload the database, as you said, and we would have less time to spend on optimizing the website. And ultimately, to communicate these challenges, we had to say, look, if we spend X amount of money to bring traffic to this website, and 94% of those people bounce, we're wasting way too much money. And as soon as you can start bringing stuff back to, look, it's going to be more efficient, we need to time these out. We're not going to discredit email. We're just going to start spacing them out, say, over a quarter. Let's do an email every 10 days. That way, you don't have to focus on doing it 2-3 times a week. You can do the same thing with blog posts. You can overburden or oversaturate your audience with blog content. Maybe it only needs to happen every 10 days, especially if you have a small team. So these are things that we like to say we're still going to do that, but in a slightly later date so we can focus on other things in the meantime. And again, this is much easier said than done, and it's going to come back to a lot of the experience you have with how long things are going to take, what speed bumps you can anticipate while you're creating a content project and things like that. But just being able to communicate that you need more time to your superiors, and they can say, yeah, no, we agree with you, this is great, you're communicating everything you need to us very well. The next important thing is if you can act on it. And this is something I think Megan does extremely well. So Megan, can you elaborate on how to act on some of these kind of goals that you set over time?
Yeah. So, Jacob and I have had a lot of conversations about this before in the past. This is really what's going to make or break a lot of marketers. And I like to do this by reverse engineering the strategy. So you start with what you want your goal to be. And then you kind of break it out over a quarter time. Because if you run a campaign for a week, you're not going to achieve anything. Even a month, you're not going to be able to really take some tangible action items out of it. So break things out over a quarter, give yourself some time, really plan out what you want to do, plan out weekly check-ins with stakeholders. Communication is very, very key. So you're going to want to identify who needs to be responsible, who needs to be accountable, who needs to be informed and consulted and supportive. So there's a RACI or RACIC, depending on your preference model. And that's basically where you just take a matrix and you take people's roles and responsibilities and you just kind of plot on this chart where everybody falls into, responsibility, informed, consulted, supporting roles. So making sure that people understand their role and who they report to and to stick to that structure without, kind of going around any of this, is really important for the project to see success. So, breaking it down by quarter, setting those weekly meetings, and really defining everybody's role, and then, starting with your goal, reverse engineering backwards. So, if you want, for example, you want to launch a social campaign, you're going to want to understand what you want out of that social campaign, the goal. Then you can build a CTA, one single CTA around that goal, but you can kind of say the CTA differently and test those CTAs differently and see how your audience is resonating with them. And then once you have the CTA, you can work backwards from there and see what assets you're going to need, what messaging you're going to need, build the story around the picture. And then you can, from there, this leads perfectly into our next slide, set your deadlines. And I think Jacob and I, Jacob likes to say he's never missed a deadline, which I honestly, I haven't seen him miss one yet. So I'm going to let you go ahead and talk about setting manageable deadlines, Jacob.
Yeah, so I like to say that because it sounds good when it rolls off the tongue. Now, I think there's an importance in deadlines just to make sure that people take responsibility for things. This webinar, for example, we had deadlines in place so that we made sure that our decks were in place ahead of time. The copy was approved and ready to go. A webinar is a fairly large process, and I will do a shout out to the marketing props team. They have a very professional staff and put this together, and it's not easy. There's 5 or 6 people behind the scenes, running something like this, and each of those 5 or 6 people have deadlines, and they have expectations that they need to meet. And what I like most about deadlines, and I don't want to sound like one of those stickler bosses or someone that's like, you need to stick to your deadline kind of thing, but it's important that you set them out in a way that you can accomplish them, right, and stick to them. And so I see that there's a question from an attendee asking what step we're on. We're in the application side of things. So setting deadlines is going to help you apply that strategy. If you have a lot of plans in place that you built in your strategy, you say, I want to do this blog content, I want to do this webinar, things like that, set a deadline for it, and then work backwards on what you need to deliver that. So I will go back to a bit about the reverse engineering and give you an example of what, say, a typical quarter could look like for, let's say, a 3-person marketing team. This is something Megan and I have done fairly recently. We knew that as a 3-person marketing team, we don't have all the resources we need to create a ton of content. But we do know that we need to create something that's going to drive leads this quarter, and we need to supplement that something with supporting content and then distribute that accordingly. So what we decided to do is build, all right, this quarter we're going to build a webinar. It's one big piece of content. And to support that piece of content, we're going to create 4 blog posts. And to support those blog posts, we're going to create, say, 10 social posts. And throw in some paid advertising and some email campaigns and do some stuff here and there. So we set a deadline for the quarterly webinar. And so we want to do it, let's say, 2.5 months into the quarter, so nearly the end. And now working backwards, we know we need to get 4 blog posts out. And we have about 10 weeks to do it. So if we do a blog post every 10 days, we'll be tracking for that webinar. And then within those blog posts, we'll be sharing it, say, the first 2 or 3 days. We'll do some influencer things, whatever. You can fill in the gaps accordingly. But the spacing that you put your deadlines on will make sure that you don't end up right at the last minute scrambling to get everything you said you were going to get done out. But instead, you planned it holistically and looked at your quarter as a whole and then solved the problems accordingly. So as you apply your marketing strategy over time, so again, we're in the application section here, you can start to get bogged down in these day-to-day tasks when you're like, all right, today I'm doing this email, today I'm doing blog, and you're following your deadlines to a T, right? You've mapped out your quarter, but then you have to execute, and you're going in and you're doing all of your work, and you can get bogged down. And you might start to second guess like what you're doing because you can lose sight of the bigger picture. And this is especially true when you have superiors or maybe bosses that are a little bit impatient and they don't have the time to see a content strategy through, and they're asking for updates. Like, hey, so-and-so, how did this blog post do? Hey, how did this do? And you're just not quite sure yet. So I'd like to talk with Megan because she's been helping us a bit on the measurement section. How do we handle situations like this?
Yeah, so the truth is, for the most part, everything everything in marketing is experimental. What works for one company isn't going to work for another. And especially with content marketing, it takes time. And we've said this probably at least 5 times by now, but it takes time, and you're not going to see, typically won't see success overnight. And really, like, no one person knows everything. So I think it's really important to kind of step back and know when to stand up for something, like when you know that it's, when you need to stand up for a campaign, and when to just kind of step back and take it as a learning lesson. Because if you can identify where things went wrong, then it's not a loss. It's not a failed campaign, in my opinion, because you know how to move forward successfully. So, as an example, I've been part of a few different campaigns that either someone wants to pull the plug in the middle of it, or even at the end of the campaign when we're, about ready to pivot and launch the next in the series, they're saying, oh, well, this didn't turn out exactly how we thought. And if I wouldn't have had the data in front of me and my experience from, other, for the specific example, other webinars in my past, I wouldn't have been able to say, hey, no, actually, this was a really successful campaign, and here's why. And if it's a campaign that you're working on and it's kind of new to you, well, before you dive in, I really hope you're doing some industry research, right? You're going to want to see what industry standards are. You're going to want to read some case studies, understanding that case studies are always going to be the best of the best, so maybe not be exactly where you want to measure yourself to start, but just understanding that, as long as you've gone in with an open mind to pivot quickly if needed, if something's failing, but also just trusting your experiences that you've had in the past and knowing that everybody is trying their best and everybody has the same end goal for the most part. We all want to see success here. So that's kind of how I trust in my ability, I guess. But so now that you've seen success, how do you continue to replicate and build on this, Jacob?
So for me, it's really all about creating process. Completing a campaign from start to finish is great, but typically when you do so, your bosses will tell you, hey, how do you do it faster next time? You're like, well, dang, this took quite a bit of work this time. How do we do it faster next time? And it is about process. It's about building templates, some kind of repeatable measures for success. That could be things like, your brand guidelines as a starting point. Just understanding the way you talk about things like boilerplates and stuff you can copy and paste in. All of those aspects will save you time. Templates, even if you don't have a designer, sometimes you can get an entire asset package developed so that you can quickly go through and turn stuff around. And as marketers, any time that you can save execution time and spend more time promoting your content, the better. So understanding what channels you need to use and frequently going through them and understanding, do I need to go through Facebook natively to share my content, or do I need to use a tool like Sprout Social or something to help me distribute it? You can build a process for essentially anything that you're doing, but I like to think of it as starting from a template side on the very back end and understanding what it takes to get a project from point A to point B, and then understanding what you need to fix along the way. So that kind of wraps up the application section, going into developing content, building a process, setting deadlines, and then repeating that success. But as you start to get more confident while you do your content marketing, you're good at communicating expectations, you can turn campaigns out, it's really important to monitor your efforts to see if things are doing well or if they're not doing well. And that's going to move us into the third part of our method, which is measurement. So Megan, how do you monitor the success of our marketing processes and our campaigns?
Yeah, so this actually just kind of ties back into what we first started with, which is setting those goals and knowing the purpose of your campaigns, why you're doing them to begin with. Even if you are just throwing out those numbers and you don't have the, previous numbers to look at from other campaigns or, understanding where things went wrong before, it's still important to set those goals in the beginning so that you have something to measure the success of the campaign against once it's finished. And it allows you to really highlight where things went wrong, and it'll point out some glaring problems like the 94% bounce rate on our landing pages. We were able to look at our MQLs and say, okay, well, it didn't end up exactly where we thought it would end up, so let's see why. And we were able to kind of go backwards through the numbers and understand how we got there. So really understanding how many MQLs do you want to get out of the project if that's what your goal is, how much in pipeline, some just pretty typical, if it's newsletter sign-ups, just have the goal in mind, have it in a doc so that you can go back to it, and then really take the time to do the reporting, because if you don't report, then you have no idea how to, iterate the next campaign, basically. And figuring out your shortcomings as much as your successes is important as ever. So you have the full picture, and now you need to communicate that full picture to your stakeholders. So Jacob, how do you discuss your performance?
This is good, because when things are going well, super easy, right? Look at all this cool stuff we did. When things are going poor, not super easy. So regardless of whether you're doing really well or really crappy, the most important thing is to be honest about it. You have to stay true to the facts and what the data is telling you. You can't hide. You can't try to fudge your numbers or try to tell them we got 1,000 Facebook likes and it didn't turn into any money, but that's great, right? You can't start a conversation like that and try to gloat about numbers that may not mean that much to them. You have to try to tell more of a story and share exactly kind of what those numbers mean. So for example, if you were running a social campaign and it got a lot of, just general engagement, but didn't kind of relate back to the website or anything like that, you'd start that conversation with, look, we actually saw quite a bit of engagement on social, which could indicate that the messaging that we're doing is working. So we might want to try this messaging over across on our website or in other campaigns to see if that can help us drive more funnel. And that particularly, comes when an executive says, well, how much money did that make us? Or what kind of results did we get? And sometimes that's a tough or a tough question to answer when you're on the spot. So always stay true, communicate any of the challenges that you ran into along the way that could have impacted those, and I'm not to throw designers under the bus, but say our designer was, say, 3 days behind what we thought our deadline should have been, and that pushed our this back, and I was late. Always, you share in your wins, you share in your blame, and you do that together. But you never throw anyone under the bus or try to elaborate on your numbers. And always discuss on what you think can be improved. And while sharing performance with stakeholders and superiors is really important, Megan and I both think it's equally important to elevate the teams around us, regardless of how significant or insignificant you think a role they played in your overall campaign. So that needs to be something that you do to elevate your team around you. Megan, what do you think about sharing successes with our team?
Yeah, no, I think this is really important. I know we're kind of coming up on time, so I'm going to try to get through it pretty quick. But it's just such a crucial step that it's so easy to overlook because you want to move on to the next project. You're really excited about the win from the last project, or you're really bummed about the loss from the last project. But whatever it is, take the time to consider all the work that went into the campaign that you just put together. And don't forget to thank the people around you. If it's a release, a big release that the entire company has a hand in, maybe you want to take a moment, or something as small as a half day is just a huge thank you, or a happy hour, so everybody can come together and talk about all their pains, what they learned, how they grew. It's just such a crucial thing that is so easily overlooked. And you said it too, just even if you don't think they played a role, even if they didn't actually play a role, I'm sure they felt the energy that was coming from the rest of the team, and they want to feel like they participated, and they want to feel like part of the whole. So just be sure to give credit where credit is due and to say thank you when everything is said and done, even if it was a failure. Again, learn from why it was a failure. But and as Jacob said too, I think it's important to share in success and your losses. So, there was a particular thing that came our way where Jacob and I were kind of on the line for something, and he and I were almost fighting over like, oh no, I'll take responsibility. That was my fault. And our boss just said, I'd rather have a team that was fighting for the responsibility of the blame than someone who is trying to point fingers and actually not solving the problem. So I think when you do take the time to include the entire team, you're going to see that in the camaraderie. When things do go wrong, you're going to fix them a lot faster, and people will come together. So yeah, I think that kind of brings us to the last little point here, which is that's a lot we just discussed. So Jacob, why don't you boil it down into a few little takeaways?
Yeah, well, first of all, when it comes back to sharing your successes and everyone that helped, I do need to mention our CMO at Think Warwick, Brian Opsel, put probably 20 or 30 hours into helping us build this deck. And there's just a lot of folks that are behind the scenes. The Julies from the marketing profs team, even Ann Hanley, like everyone that just comes together to bring something to fruition. Like you almost think that like, well, there's an assumption that they're going to get credit, but really mentioning people by name is important. And that helps you share in your team wins, but it also helps you have people have your back when marketing doesn't do too well. And sometimes that's going to happen. Sometimes campaigns aren't going to do so well, and you'll run into a situation that, say, Megan and I had where, we made a mistake, and Megan was like, this is my fault. And I said, well, no, it's my fault. And then our boss collectively said, well, it's actually our fault. And that was actually kind of a great team building scenario that helped us, and it kind of brings the point to our final slide here, helps us confidently communicate with each other and communicate with our challenges. So we can say, like, look, this is what we're going through, and everyone can come together because they feel like we're all part of a team. And I guess if I could boil it down, I think you asked for one key takeaway. It is all about managing expectations and having a clear line of communication. And a lot of that comes with experience. However, I'm sure a lot of you know how long it takes to get something from point A to point B, whether it be a blog post or any piece of content you're creating. That maybe it takes 10 hours to do a blog post, not 2. I know Brian Hodgman from Hodgman Media did a really good post on how long things take to get from point A to point B. Some articles take 3 weeks, some things take longer. Knowing that and being able to manage that expectations clearly is the best way to go. That's probably the best takeaway I have, is to just be able to communicate that overall. And the tactics will always change. Your strategies will change depending on your scenario. With that, I think we're ready to move into some questions here. Heidi, are you going to hop on for this?
Yeah, absolutely. That was great information. Thank you both, and love the slides too. So we have a few questions that have come in from viewers. So someone was wondering if you have a resource that you turn to online for things like industry research and case studies and templates, that type of thing.
Can I say marketing profs?
That's a good answer. Yes, true.
I do get quite a bit of stuff from Marketing Profs, as well as a Content Marketing Institute for general frameworks and things like that. I think there's some great templates that can get you started. I never take them exactly for what they are, but I always adapt them for what I need. Is there any tool that you use, Megan, or any resource?
Yeah, obviously Marketing Profs, and HubSpot has a really good, HubSpot Academy. They've got just these amazing, insightful. Some of them are kind of high, for entry level, but they do get granular and really helpful. And I think what's really helpful with them is they provide these templates that Jacob's talking about, where you can kind of make them your own and tailor them. And then in addition to that, I would say really dig into the industry that you're in and get familiar with those industry blogs and sites themselves. For example, we're heavy into like a Salesforce universe right now. So I've just kind of really dug into that audience and that community to understand the way they speak to one another and the conversations that they have. Salesforce then is like, one of their go-to people. So I'm talking with Salesforce Ben now. So I think having, the overarching, we're in marketing, go to the marketing sites, and then also just diving into your industry specific is really important.
Yeah, I found some from Adobe as well. If you're more of a senior level marketer, they have some great marketing maturity assessments that can kind of push you in the right direction as well.
Those are great tips. And we have just time for one or two more. So Dallas is actually wondering if you could describe the difference between a content marketer and a content strategist. And then I'll actually add to her question and say, if you're in hiring mode, when do you know that you need one versus the other, the marketer versus the strategist?
Well, let's see. Yeah, I'll live in this category because often the two are confused, particularly when they're hiring, and this happens a lot in Silicon Valley. I would say that a strategist knows more about everything that you need to do and is more of a leadership role, and a marketer specifically is more of a tactical role. So if you don't have anyone to execute the strategy, you're not ready for a strategist. So sometimes, especially at small organizations, you'll start pretty heavy on the tactical side of things and just learn as you grow, because it's unrealistic to hire a strategist and then hop into all the tactics later. You need to find that right balance. And this is a big hiring challenge, and I think this is probably another webinar that we need to go through, and marketing hiring challenges. I'd be happy to take this question offline. But a lot of times, a company will hire a CMO too early or a VP of marketing too early without a team underneath them to support them. So even though they know all of the things they need to be doing, because it's just a one-person show, they can't execute on it accordingly. So if you don't have a strategist or leadership in place, I would start with a content marketer that may know a little bit of both and try to find some of that overlapping stuff.
I think that's really sage advice. Thank you. And Jacob, someone actually would like the URL for the blog that you mentioned on how long it takes to get things from point A to point B. Could you share that URL with us again?
So that is from a guy named Brian Honigman, and it's HONIGMAN, I think. It got me on the spot there. But he is he's the founder. Yeah, that's how you spell it, Julie. Brian Honigman. I think it's honigmanmedia.com, and he has just a fantastic, very strategic and tactical blog for you guys to follow. And he's very active on Twitter and LinkedIn and stuff. So if you just reach out to him, he'd be happy to share that with you. It's probably 1,500, 2,000 words, and I read it and I was like, man, this is spot on. He interviewed folks from, say, first round review, and they said, yeah, our really in-depth 3,000-word articles take 3 weeks to create. And that's really eye-opening for a lot of people, because sometimes, especially if you're in the San Francisco area, they say, look, we need a blog post in 2 minutes. Or at least seemingly says, once a day kind of thing. You're like, wow, I can't churn out that high quality of content that quickly, realistically, without burning out.
It does take time. That's absolutely right.
That point, Aaron Orendorf actually mentions, I think he says up to 3 to 6 months on one piece, but that's because he's not just working on the piece, he's working on the distribution strategy, the partnerships, and everything that goes along with it. So I think it is a really good call out there that sometimes one piece can take you a half a year.
Those are great tips. Yeah, thank you both. Now, we didn't get a chance to answer everybody's questions, but if you have one that we didn't answer, please feel free to reach out to our presenters directly. And folks, we also truly value your feedback, so please fill out the short survey that will pop up momentarily on your screen. And the next webinar begins shortly at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time with Randy Frisch, who will present an actionable framework for persuading prospects through the power of personalized content in acquisition, sales enablement, and ABM. And real quick, the Twitter handles for both of our presenters, Megan is at @socialmegan, MEAGAN, and Jacob can be found at Jacob Warwick, at Jacob Warwick, WARWICK. Thank you, Jake and Megan, for a great session. Really great tips. We appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you attending.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.